Esports podcast, noun. A 2-hour-long video full of banter and nonsense where the guests are only introduced halfway through and the outro makes you think your internet's died. Huh.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Daring Minds. The last, actually, of 2022. We haven't done one for a while. That is, to be fair, because there was no Valorant. There was, though, which is what we'll get to in this episode, but there wasn't any of the tier 1 VCT, NANEU and all the rest of that jazz. So what I thought we'd do as a last episode is, if you notice on this show anyway, because I'm new to Valorant and I'm obviously not from Valorant, it's probably never going to be my main game. I do try to also make it part interview, part general thoughts on the game and the scene, because what I think to myself, and this will be relevant later in the episode, is my audience in theory have some similar alignment with what I think about. So what I want to do is just introduce them to the game. It's also why I like to take people who were in CSGO. So if people don't know, our guest for this episode, sapphiRe, is actually a super OG in esports. Because I've noticed in esports, it's been around that long now, that if you've just been around for 5 years, they call you an OG or a veteran. It's do you know what that term means? Because people don't know. Put it this way, just me alone, I've actually known sapphiRe for 18 years. That's real.
What
in esports.
Fuck?
Yeah,
absolutely.
That,
yes.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Yes. And back then, by the way,
no, because what I was going to add on to that is when you say you're considered an OG in esports if you've been around for more than 5 years. I always find it laughable when it seems that as soon as you hit 25, people are like, oh, I'm so old. And to me, as a 26-year-old, I get embarrassed when people say that. I'm like, no, please, it's still the baby age. Don't go thinking you're old.
And if people don't know, actually, even back then, so we're talking 2004, 2005, sapphiRe was actually playing, admittedly at a low level, in tournaments, the top tournaments in Counter-Strike with men. She would go along with the mixed team or people that she knew in her area or they're just below the pro level, and she would play back then. So she is a super OG. And also, and this is where we'll segue into talk about Valorant a bit, is she also was one of the main spectators, observers of CSGO, the entire history of the game pretty much. In fact, until very recently. In fact, don't you still do some tournaments in CSGO every now and then?
I do, yeah. I actually did the recent major, which is kind of surprising.
Oh, there we go. Okay, fair enough.
I did, yeah, exactly,
right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've been dabbling in CS for a while. I'm going to bring up that my debut, I think when we were in the same place, my debut was losing to Natu 13-0 on LAN. So that happened. D Skyline at CPL 2004, I think. I top frag with about 5 kills, maybe. So
then you know the team didn't do well that game.
In 2004, I turned 8.
Oh, God, no, dear. Okay, yeah, well.
I was born in 1996.
Also, if you want to know, here's the reference for you. The team she's talking about losing to, by the way, the owner of the player in that team she referenced is the guy who made Ents. So this is how old school all the shit we're talking about is. Natu, the Finnish guy, obviously. Right, so the segue is this, though, sapphiRe. Obviously, we can talk a bit about CSGO, and we will as a reference point. But if people don't know, there's also a really unusual trivia point that actually a lot of people don't seem to put this together, considering how famous you are in CSGO, which is you are actually married to Volcano, the former 1.6 pro, who basically is the person who made and is one of the leading people behind Valorant the game. So actually, just to start there, I wanted to ask that, right? Because the thing I've always thought must have been mad awkward for you is I've been at the CSGO events that were in the couple of years before Valorant. If you don't know Gio, there actually was a rumor that Riot was going to make a game like CSGO. I'm going to say 5 years before ever came. It was quite a lot of time before. And the joke is obviously every now and then in industry convo, these will come up in green rooms oh, have you heard Riot's making that game? And the joke is you must have been sat there the whole time because I don't remember you ever commenting on it or being yeah, actually, it's you never gave anything away. You must have been being a double agent or something.
Oh, it was terrible. The amount of people trying to buy me drinks at the ESA LAN bars to get information out of me. I think it was Richard that actually tweeted something is sus here because they just picked up Volcano at Riot. So that's a little fishy. But yeah, I've been fortunate to see the game for 7-8 years now. I want to say I was the only external person on one of the playtest teams, which was very fun to have that opportunity to come in there and see it every week, see how it's been developed over the years. I don't talk about it much. Neither of us do. I just don't want people to think I get the opportunities I do because of who I married. But it's been really great to be able to lend some of my insight, especially on the observing side. So Riot has actually hired me as a consultant on the observing, the spectator tools. So they look a lot different than when they launched. And I think I was a bit of part of that.
Because that's actually one thing I did want to ask about was, if people don't know, in the early days as well, all that used to be said, even behind the scenes, was like, volcanoes involved. That was the one thing anyone knew, because it's the only person we all know from CSGO that was involved. And then the other thing was, they would all just say something like they all build it like it was meant to compete with CSGO. It was supposed to be like the CSGO replacement, or it was like the battle. When you saw the early version years and years ago, was it very different to the current version of Valorant? Was it a different concept or anything? Because I know it took, like I say, it took a lot of years to actually get going as a game for some reason.
It took a lot of years, but I mean, the core was still the same, of a round-based game where you have to plant the spike and defuse it. So a lot of that was similar. I remember thinking,
was there always 3 bomb sites? Was that always part of it?
Well, that's only one map.
I think so. That was one of the earlier maps. So that was definitely one of them. I remember thinking the barriers were weird, that you can push up.
Yes.
To a certain point, and then you're stuck behind this barrier until the freeze time drops. So I remember that was like a really weird concept. It just seems normal at the time.
It's more like Overwatch. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, yep. But I mean, you know, the agents have changed. It certainly looks better. I remember. You know, and this is me being naive around what game development looks like, but going to some of the early play tests, and it's just grayed out walls.
Oh, right, because you didn't have all the graphics and stuff, right?
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, yes. Exactly. And, you know, agents are just like blocks instead of actual
I've heard it's actually the same
characters.
thing if you do movies, because in the modern day they do all the CGI stuff, and obviously while you're doing the movie, they haven't done that yet. And I've heard apparently, like, if you ever watch those scenes, like, what they're seeing on the camera looks terrible. Like, it does look like... But when you see it with, like, a dragon coming or something, it does look fucking amazing, obviously, on the real version, you know.
Of course, yeah. So I didn't have enough appreciation for what goes into it. I think one of my favorite stories, though, is actually Sal in the early days. Like, they traveled to different locations. And I don't know if I should say locations, because I don't know if all of them are out, but they Riot would give them cameras. And they'd be taking pictures, not just of the touristy stuff, but literally like the ceilings, the floors. What does the cobblestone look like? What does the door handle look like? So that they could recreate those in the map and make it as realistic as possible. So I thought those are pretty interesting.
Like everyone talking about the Call of Duty Amsterdam like map or whatever it is. I haven't played it, but didn't like. There was a hotel or something that decided they were going to like sue Activision over that or something like that.
What, because they were featured on the map?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay.
But like, it also reminded me like when Modern Warfare came out and like they had that Piccadilly Circus map, and it was just like so realistic. It's like, you know that they've gone and taken photos of like every detail of like the street to recreate it.
The only problem with that is, I have to say, that does actually make me get like slightly anxious, because I remember back in the day, right, if you were like an old school Counter-Strike fan, if you ever did something like, you could obviously do this in map makers, if you ever made like a level of your school, like, mate, you are like one incident away from them saying you're a terrorist, basically. Like, that's what they're going to think. So unfortunately, I get really nervous when I hear that, because next story's going to be like, look, and they're just killing people on this map that looks like Piccadilly Circus. Like, what the fuck? Like, you know, that's too close to the
same place. I remember those articles. The kid recreated his school in Counter-Strike, you know. Terrible.
Even though back then it might just have been something harmless to you, like, you know, he got the map maker and he thought, right, like, you'll make one of somewhere that you know, but like, you can see how that could get really dodgy really quick.
Yeah, I mean, especially in like, you know, I can imagine like 10, 15 years ago, right, where like people didn't think about things in the same way that you think about things.
No, there wasn't any, right? There wasn't even the implication that there'd be some real world effect. Exactly, yeah. By the way, the other thing I also wanted to ask about was this, which was it ever actually awkward in the industry to like be working CSGO events and then know that Valorant's coming and then start working Valorant? And you've basically gone between the two like simultaneously. Has there ever actually been any like drama based on that, or any company asking like you have to be one or the other? Has there ever been anything like even implied?
I think I've been fortunate that no, that hasn't been the case. And maybe I'm just good at my job and good at observing, but no, fortunately people have been good about it. And I think both like on the CSGO and the Valorant side, it's always like, you know, give me the inside scoop. Like what are they working on? And I think they're both taking inspiration from each other at this point. So I've been in a good position where they both treated me very, very well. And, you know, I'm sure there's a future where like ESL probably wants to do Valorant events. Maybe they do. And I know Blast has. So there's a lot of crossover.
What is, since you opened the door to that, obviously, since your main specialty has been observing all these years, and I will say, by the way, that is by definition, I know a lot of people think they have this title in esports, observer is by definition the most thankless job, because think about it, you only remember they exist when they fuck up. If they do their job well, you actually don't even think a person was involved. You just go, I'm seeing the game, brilliant.
Gets so
I know,
much shit.
it's so fucked up, isn't it? So the joke is, like, the only time they reference it is when you miss the kill or you click the wrong button or whatever. And also, I'll throw this in there as well. The thing that I think in the modern day must tilt observers is people also forget the observer doesn't pick which camera we're showing. That's the producer. Like, the observer just shows the camera angle. Like, the producer's the one who chose the wrong camera. Like, they don't really flip through all of them. They have the couple. So anyway, I'm getting triggered myself there. Well, that is one area that in CSGO, we've never really, if people don't know, Valve's never put any special attention to that. The TOs have a fairly limited setup and you figure out what you do yourself. As you say, in Valorant, they actually intentionally made this game an esport. Like, what did they do with some of the observing side of things?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in Counter-Strike, first off, I think I got like one thing in the game that I asked for over many emails. But yeah, Valorant has been, they've done a wonderful job in that Prius, myself, and eventually Yeti, we're in their Slack, we're in their conversations, we're in their daily gameplay tests, asking us questions, letting us watch the staff play the games and give input from it from a spectator perspective. So it's been built from the ground up with observing esports in their minds, and they're using the experts to develop that. So we've taken a lot of inspiration, obviously, from what CS:GO does very well, and we've even added things that don't even exist in CS:GO. So like following. So for example, like we can, if we're doing a remote show, the producer can open Valorant. We can open Valorant from thousands of miles away and do all of our movements in the game. And then the producer can set it to follow sapphiRe's movements. Now that exists in Counter-Strike in a sense, but you've got to use GoTV, you've got to use different launch commands, you have to add certain IPs into the game server. It's a big convoluted process. So in Valorant, just have two spectators and set to follow one. I did an event with Tarek and Ludwig the other couple weekends ago, same thing. They all hopped in the observer slots. They wanted to talk about the games, but they didn't actually observe themselves. They just said, follow sapphiRe's movements, and it follows all my movements. So we were able to create new things that don't really exist in a lot of games because this is like, they built this to be an esport.
One thing I really like about Valorant, or at least from the perspective of someone who's not an observer, so by all means, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that I feel like of the esports that I've worked in, especially the main three that I've worked in, the observers in Valorant get a lot of reverence. You know, there's a lot of credit. There's a lot of, like, people know who the observers are. And I don't know what, like, because in other games, I feel that observers have been very underpaid. I don't know what that's like in Valorant, but like, at least from a social standpoint, it feels like there's a lot of kind of veneration given to observers, which I think is like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I think, and I'm happy to say it because I'm proud of how Riot has treated us. Our payment is very, very good in Valorant. Very, very good. We're treated very well. And I'm grateful for that. So first off, Riot themselves have done a good job. There's been, I don't know, like it's just on social, like all these like third party events have done a good job about like, they'll have their talent announcement and right below it, they'll have their producer, their observer, their replay announcers. I don't really know where that spawned from. Maybe it's just the fact that a lot of these third parties are run by the community themselves and they want to promote themselves. I don't know.
I know that was something that like we really pushed for in Rainbow Six, was to ensure the observers were included in like talent announcements. And I think like in Siege there was a bit of a problem like for a while about like observers sort of were kind of like hidden away, and I don't just mean like in terms of talent announcements, I just mean like sometimes it almost felt uncomfortable as a talent to know that I was kind of being treated a little bit differently to how the observers were. Yeah, so I like, at least from where I'm sitting, and I'm not the, you know, the be all end all of the view on the industry. But from where I'm sitting, like over the course of the last few years, it feels like it has been almost like a social change that people have kind of wanted that credit to be more publicly known.
Yeah, I think so. You know, and kind of part of it goes back to the talent themselves. I know, like in some of the ESL days, like some of the casters would want to know that Prius and I are working.
They would always shout you out, right? Yeah, they would give you a little comment.
They can do their jobs better if they have good observers. So I think part of that goes back to the talent. I think there's like you said, a social movement. I think there's more awareness that there's other jobs in the industry. If you can't be a player, if you can't be a caster, there's other jobs available. So I think there's more awareness around that.
I think people also, like, just to jump in with that, like, I think there's, like, people don't realize how freaking knowledgeable you have to be an observer. Like, I always say to people, like, I've always been a color caster and an analyst. So in theory, I do the job where you have to know a lot. But I feel like both as a caster and an analyst, you have time to think about what it is you're going to say. Whereas an observer, you have to react so intuitively to your game sense and your game knowledge of what's happening and what is going to happen. And it's like, sure, like there's an element of that as a talent, but I don't think it's to the same extent because like I said, you get some time to like think about it when you're on air and you don't as an observer. So like people who don't have a good game sense, just that job just isn't for you. It's such a highly skilled job, not just because you have to be able to use a controller well.
Yeah, there's like, you know, you can do a good job by knowing how to read the radar, but you can do a great job by understanding the players, understanding all the possible scenarios that could happen. There's obviously some big differences between Counter-Strike and Valorant observing, and in Counter-Strike, I'm pretty much relying on that radar. In Valorant, there's so many things that can happen that people get pinged through walls and people are going to die through the walls. Very thick walls compared to Counter-Strike, which is now, you know, they don't have the wall spans like they used to, but there's a lot you have to know. So like I'm studying tape just like I would when I was a player. So I'm watching games all the time. I'm looking for tendencies. I'm looking for different strats. I've got piles and piles of notes, just like I would when I was competing. So there's a lot of thought that goes into it so that we can just react much faster. We can see a certain setup and know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, I've got a few points on that. Like one thing I would say on the observer angle that you're talking about here is I think that's actually why, if people don't know, it's actually not a surprise to me when I look back in hindsight that like Yanko was, if you don't know, before sapphiRe and Priest, the most famous observer, and he became basically the most famous analyst in the world in CSGO. He still works on the desk to this day. And then similarly, if people don't know, at the end of 1.6 in terms at CSGO rather, that's how old school my brain is, when we transitioned to Valorant, Sliggy was becoming famous as the main observer guy, and he obviously became a top coach in Valorant. The reason it doesn't surprise me is because basically what you're talking about, an analyst himself, is if you don't know, these guys, they're not really just like going to the right person. They have to essentially predict what is about to happen in the games. You actually do have to know the game really well. It's like, you'll notice this when people even are just casters. Some casters really do just focus on the crosshair. Some casters are so amazing at catching like the second someone's doing a flank or it's going to be like a fake, and like some of them are just so I think if you're going to be observer, that is essential. And then I'd also tie it into the pay angle, which is that's probably the most brutal thing about that job in particular is it, like I say, because when you do your job well, people don't notice you did anything. It's actually bizarrely in esports a job that involves high competence but wasn't very well compensated by the actual job, because what's bizarre is people did treat it like you could just hire all the talent and at the end be like, right, who's available? Like, and some events, notoriously by the way, the worst events ever in CSGO history, including majors, were the ones where that's what they did. They hired all the best talent and at the end they were like, we've got our own guys we can just put, like, if people don't know, the Starlight Berlin Mid's probably the most infamous one ever. That was the one where the joke was like they just missed every highlight. It's like they would be on the other side of the map when the highlight was happening, or they'd be on like the guy getting killed. Like it was a nightmare because the problem is, Gio, they just used some guys that they actually had from PUBG. It wasn't even CSGO people. If
you could be the best caster in the world and you're not going to be able to cast very well if the observing is shite, because you're not going to see anything, right?
Exactly.
Like, yes. So like the talent, as good as they may be, are reliant upon like it's a building block, right?
There are even more now, by the way, because here's the thing. Back in the day as well, when you would just have two casters and there wasn't really much of a producer, so say it was like Anders and Semler back in the day, the difference is, back when the observing was really dodgy and we didn't have any famous people, they really might just have, like, they might not even be on what the camera's on the stream. They might have like a second monitor and they might just be watching the action, so they can always get it off. But in the modern day, I mean, I'm sure you know this is a cast, most of the time you intentionally cast from the program monitor that you know is what they're seeing on screen, because you don't want to give too much info that like the guy can't see. So yeah, I agree. I think it's a mega important role. But I want to ask you, look, you don't have to give specific numbers here, but I've heard until a few years ago the people who were doing observing work on like real talent rates, because to be fair, talent rates themselves did like scale really crazy from like 2015 to now, as in they went geo from like, you know, maybe you get like, I'll give you a random number, maybe you get like €600 for the whole event, like 3 days, to like 2 years later,
you get
what? So 2 years later, you get like 1,000 for 1 day of the event. Like that's like the scale. But the problem is, as far as I know, the observers, it was way slower. Wasn't it only like a couple of years ago you got to like real proper day rates?
Yeah, it took a while. Maybe it's bad, but like it didn't bother me too much because I always have done this as a side job. I've always had a full-time job. So I didn't push as much as I could. I always, Prius and I always joke because he's like actually a really, really good negotiator. So we always make the fun joke that, you know, the woman and the man are doing the exact same amount of job, but same workload, same job, but he gets higher pay, because he's just he pushes because this is his full-time job. But, yeah, it's really only until the last couple of years that, there's been definitely more budget put into it. It's not that afterthought anymore. We're getting contacted more than 2 to 3 weeks in advance. It's hard to drop everything and travel across the world with 2 to 3 weeks notice. In the Riot Games case, like we're pretty much already booked for all of next year,
that's cool.
Which is really, really nice to hear. Makes planning my life so much better. So, yeah, it's been a big improvement, probably even just like the start of COVID, like even before that was kind of a disaster. But, you know, we took every opportunity we could, because if you say no, you know, they're going to find the next person. That's who they're going to go to every time. So I'm sure a lot of talent feel the same way, like pass up that one opportunity, might not get the next one.
Also, I can tell you as well, the other area that job was really slow to adapt to the industry is if you were like casters, famously, everyone started the same, right? You had an event and we all just did every game. And then eventually, it was only a couple of years before casters did like one series a day, and then the other caster does the other, and then eventually analysts got the same thing. If people don't know, until like, again, a couple of years ago, if you were the observer, you just work all day long, mate. You're just sat there. Like the joke is, when you hire multiple, they're just shifts. Like that guy goes out like to have some food, you come in. I've seen some of those workloads, even at Flashpoint, like, man, you guys would be sat there for like 9 hours in a row.
Yeah, there's the very famous like Katowice like going till 4 a.m. For BO3 day, which that was rough. Thankfully, that's a thing of the past now.
I like the way in your mind that's like some historic battle that you had in war or something like. Yeah, it did feel like that at time. Yeah, with current events, both like the CSGO Rio Major, all the VCT Masters events, there's always a second POV observer. I'm only doing half the games per day. At most, it's 2 BO3s. And anything after that, it's not even like laziness. It's like staring at dots on a map. Sometimes you have to use 60 hertz monitors too. It's just the way.
Why? Because thinking really hard. Like this is something that I like. It grinds me about, like, I think, you know, what I assume people will think about casters, but it's the same for observers. It's like the mental energy is really high.
Yeah.
It's very high as well. And that, I find that any kind of mental exertion is way more exhausting than physical exertion when it comes to like a workload, right? And so it's like that on top of all of that as well, like having your eyes pierced by your 60 hertz shit.
Yeah, and it's not just it's just not the live maps. It's coming in several hours before, doing play tests, making sure that all works. And, you know, we're not sometimes it's a long shuttle back because, you know, they put us in the nice hotels, but the nice hotels aren't always next to the venue. So there could be up to like 45-minute travel time. So these are, you know, 12, 14-hour days. What's also changed is actually we get overtime pay now, which is
that's awesome.
Something that again didn't exist. So, you know, we're not too upset when it goes to multiple overtimes.
See, the joke is, they've actually inverted your incentive structure. Like, you're actually the only talent now who are loving it when it goes like third map overtime.
Hell yeah, bring it on.
That's good. I hadn't thought of that angle. Fair enough. Okay. Mm-hmm. By the way, that is actually a point you bring up there, Gio, that I do think is criminally misunderstood by fans. Like, put it this way, this might sound extreme if you're just a fan listening at home. Even just doing a talk show like this is not the same as just doing a call if we had no cameras on, lights off, and we didn't know anyone was there. Like, even just mentally, you have to hold a certain space in your mind, the way you're listening to other people. It is draining, and especially if you're doing a whole day. If you do like 8 hours, that is a lot of work mentally.
One of the things that, like, I've had to kind of learn, and that really frustrates me, like massively frustrates me.
I like the way you're just fully Christmased out, by the way, with that fucking.
You know what? Like, I went shopping today, and like the last few days, all I do is I just sit in this onesie.
Love it.
It's like, well, I don't want to pay to heat my house, you know. But this is one thing that like I kind of like realized the hard way when I started doing this job, because I've only been doing this professionally since like January 2019. So I'm still very like young in the industry, right? But for me, I found out like the hard way, I find it like exceptionally exhausting to VOD review. Now, obviously all of us have to VOD review. It's part of the job and it's something that I enjoy doing. And I'd imagine everyone finds it really tiring, but like the medication I take for my chronic illness, it makes me really, really tired. So I usually have to sleep like during the day, every day. I fucking hate it. It's like the worst thing ever.
Okay.
And usually I've had to learn as I've been doing this job how to manage this schedule of VOD reviewing and sleeping so that I can actually handle how fucking mentally exhausting it is to get as much done as I need to do. And it feels ridiculous, like, to say to people, oh yeah, like I'm tired because I was watching a video game. Like, that doesn't make sense, does it? Like, to people who don't have to like do that and put in the like that mental work, like that sounds like such a cop-out. And I always feel like so dumb because it's like, oh yeah, my invisible disease and my fake job come together, like really wear me out. And I always just, it's so embarrassing.
Well, I mean, with Valorant though, like watching the VOD, like you don't get all the information immediately. It's like you got to watch it one time to see what happens on the screen, a second time to look at the radar, a third time to try to watch like how people are reacting in the X, right? Because you can't just hop into the VOD and move around. So it's definitely harder to do in Valorant than something like CS.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, when you actually were getting into Valorant as a game, since you are someone who has observed both to a large degree, you should be one of the best people we can ask about some of the contrasts, some of the differences. So one thing I actually did wonder about purely from an observing POV is, I feel like Valorant slightly veers into some of the problems Overwatch famously had, which is you've got a lot of things happening at once. And as I say, you can't show them all. Like the difference in CSGO is, look, you can miss kills. That's not the end of the world. Like as long as you get like the main entry pack and you get like the right fight and the right version of the clutch, generally will forgive you because there's only a couple of points of action in CS map. But I've seen some of the games, depending on the agents in Valorant, like you might have to look at two separate sides of the map at the same time, essentially. So like, how do you manage that aspect? Like, I mean, I assume at this point you have like teams and you're divided up or something. How do you do it?
Yeah, we do have teams. So I've only done like a little Overwatch, but I think they usually use like a team of 4 to 5.
Yeah, they have a lot.
In Counter-Strike, we usually could do everything with a single person because we can bind. Prius and I have like a fully built out Elgato Stream Deck where we've got images of where all the third person cams are.
Right.
We can easily click those. We've got bind so that when we're in spawn, there's these like cinematics that we've already recorded in advance. Everything's done in advance and we just show up and push the buttons. In Valorant, we usually do 2 to 3 people. I'm always POV, so my focus is on first person. But like a lot of times, like you said, Duncan, like something could be happening on completely other side of the map that impacts the main points. Vipers throwing things miles in the air, Brimstone's throwing mollies miles in the air. Those are things that are are harder to spot. Like, you know, you have to do the debate of like, do I switch to this Brimstone, even though he's not taking a fight? He's sitting in spawn, but he's throwing this molly that's going to prevent the spike from being diffused. You have to make those decisions. We definitely use more free cams or cinematics. So we've got someone that's switching to those. And I think, I don't know. I feel like the frags are like slightly less satisfying to watch in Valorant than CSGO. So it's like I'm okay sticking on third person a little more often than I would in CS.
Must be wild when people do like the chamber teleport though. Like, where the fuck are we going? You know what I mean? Like,
oh god,
I just guess.
They won't be doing that anymore.
That's true. That's true.
We are. Yeah. I mean, that's another thing that I have to think of too. Is like, you know, when the round is starting, where did chamber throw their TP so that if I'm watching chamber and they TP back, like where did I end up? Because when I'm observing, I always have a plan A, B, and C. So if that plan A, that person dies, I'm going to B immediately, and then I'm going to C, and it screws everything up when the chamber's there. And then because we don't have a replay system yet, I'm going to say, I don't know if it's yet, I hope it's yet, that getting things that we missed is not as easy. So in Counter-Strike, we've gotten to the point where like Prius and I essentially wrote an algorithm of like the most important things that you should capture, like a 3K is more important than 2K, etc. And then we hired someone else to write a bot. And so it's 7 seconds delayed. And then the things that if a 3K happened and we only got 2 of them, it will grab both the 3K.
Ah, right. It records it so you can do a replay.
It records it. It records it. Exactly.
Right.
That can't exist yet in Valorant. So the ways you can do it are at like a Masters or a Champions event. It's easier to pull all 10 players' POVs into the EVS operator, and they can grab things. Not every production can pull that off, especially the online events. So we might just have a second POV observer that's literally just doing the opposite of me. So their job is to watch what I'm doing and click the other person that's taking that fight, which is actually
observer.
Yeah, contingency observer. Exactly. And that's actually harder than being the main observer because like trying to change your brain around to
What's
do
the
what
thing
you
I
don't
wouldn't
think
observe? All right, that's what I gotta go look at.
Yeah. So
the joke is you should just hire a bad observer, then they'll actually just do the other shit anyway, won't they?
Well, that's why I work with Prius. So
there you go. Okay.
There you go. Yeah, so it's a bit of more complicated setup, and then unfortunately, like to get that like delayed observer, that really requires demos, replay systems to be able to read what's happening live. So hopefully that's a thing in the future because it makes it harder on lower budget productions to get all these angles, which means
EVS operator is an expensive job,
for
right?
sure.
Like that costs a lot of money to hire.
You know, that's actually an area a lot of people won't be aware because obviously they don't know the tech stuff behind the scenes. Unfortunately, this is where actually sports doesn't do us a favor because it turns out a lot of the tech that they have in TV, for example, Geo, is actually not good enough for CSGO. Like I'll just use E-League, for example, the one I used to work on with TBS, right? Their whole thing is they had worse quality replays than normal tournaments, Geo, because they had an actual like special piece of hardware that it had to go into. I think Faceit had the same thing.
Was
Sapphire.
it the EVS, the little like
something like that? And the problem with it was everyone will know exactly what I'm talking about because every one of these replays, it was like a really bad old school frag movie where the frame rate was too low. Do you know what I mean? Like it would make it all like jerky. Yeah, because I guess this is the machine they use for sports to do replay or something. But like in CSGO, it actually just made it look bad when you showed like a replay. And I used to think like, why are we using that? And the joke is they would actually tell me, like, this is the best piece of technology in the world. What are you talking? Like, this costs $10,000. Like that. All right, mate. Like, it's not actually suitable for esports.
Yeah, no, it's so funny. I would actually challenge someone to build one because it isn't. There isn't like a best tool right now. But a funny note actually on EVS, like I've been starting a TikTok like. It's not dancing or anything. It's literally like behind the scenes of But it took me a while to like understand TikTok, but it's all like behind the scenes of esports stuff, and people like love that. And like my best video right now is literally standing behind the EVS operator.
Is it the one of Joey?
Of Joey. 15
seconds
of his job, and it has 1.6 million views.
Fucking hell, what?
Yeah.
But it's fascinating,
exactly.
like EVS machines, because you have to be so a friend of mine explained it to me, because he was like, the thing with EVS is it's really hard to train people to do it, like, but you get paid really highly if you do. And I was like, well, why'd you get paid so much? And he was like, well, A, because if you fuck it up, you fucked up the whole broadcast, at least in sports, right? Traditional sports is like, you're being paid to get that one perfect replay, but if you don't get it, like, you fucked everything. But also, like, you watch someone use them and it's like, they don't even look at it, but they're like twiddling the little thing and like.
Oh, they're always doing something right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's mesmerizing and fascinating, but it also makes me glad that it's not my job, because I would undoubtedly screw it up.
Yeah, no, that's terrible. I mean, we've all seen like bad replays and we're like, what the hell? Like, why? I'd rather have not seen that.
Yeah, exactly. Drive 10 seconds back.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, there can be some pretty bad replays. But yeah, I mean, it's an impressive tool to use, like being able to, like, I'm just watching one POV essentially versus the EVS operator has to know what happened on all 10 player POVs. And we try to, like, Joey's who I work with a lot, like, Joey, get I don't know, the 3K that I missed or something. So sometimes I'll beg too, especially when I really know I screwed something up. So I'm like, please show me this, because otherwise, it's lost to history if we don't show it.
Another thing I want to ask you actually is, if people don't know, you obviously are a real old school CS fan. You just came up playing CS like everyone did and then got in the industry. And in fact, it was a few years before you stopped just being a player and became like an industry figure. There was like maybe like 5-6 year gap. So for you, it must be pretty surreal to actually, like, if people don't know, when she worked with Dignitas, she literally was working with like Get Right and Forest. Like, by the way, those are like the most legendary 1.6 players ever. Working at the majors, you literally get to be part of the major. You're not just watching it on TV or HLTV back in there. Is that pretty surreal for you still? Do you still vibe with it?
Oh yeah, of course. It's amazing to be a part of this. I never would have expected. Like, I was, like you said, I was literally just a fan. I remember. So my husband played for Team 3D, and there was a no girlfriend rule for a while, and I just wanted to go to the events because I genuinely just wanted to be there. Like, I wanted to sit in the audience. I wanted to cheer for my favorite teams. It didn't just have to be my husband, well, then boyfriend teams at the time, but like, I just loved being around the energy of this game, of the fans. So I've always wanted to be involved. I did so many like side jobs over the years while I was competing. Somehow made my way into ESL Pro League, and I don't know if that was Go or Source. I don't remember. But I did pretty decent over the years competing, but I just wanted to be in this industry. It didn't seem like a real job years ago.
Sure.
It didn't seem possible. It even took a while, like, when I got the offer from Dignitas, it took me like months to accept it, because it just, there was something nice about a 9-to-5 job in that, like, no one bothers you after 5 p.m. No one talks to you on the weekend, so you could do your own thing. But like, I knew I wanted to just like live and breathe working in the industry, and that's why I do, I think, three or four jobs right now, almost full time.
Sure. Right, I saw that you guys obviously were all watching the Valorant Game Changers stuff recently, and that's been the big... By the way, I actually think that's quite a clever way to use it, is actually put it during essentially the off-season for the rest. There's nothing else to watch, like if you want to watch it. Or the other thing was you could technically watch that like Nation series that Geo did. There was that and Game Changers were what there was in the last few months. I thought the way we could talk about it is like this, right? What I've always tried to do with my channel is, like I said at the beginning, I just take the logic of, like, I don't really do it for a set fan. I just think if I was my own fan, so I'm obviously doing the content I like anyway, this is the like world view I could bring you into, right? So what I've always tried to do when I do shows with women is this. I know that there are going to be fans of mine who like edgy jokes and stuff, who unfortunately they're just young and ignorant. They just don't know anything about the world. They're not actually people who dislike women or have any problem. They just don't know even the basic arguments. Like, for example, when they say that thing famously of like, why don't you just take this prize money and put it in like the real men's tournament though, and then like, there'll be more there? no one's ever explained this. It's quite a nuanced industry point of like that money actually exists specifically for doing events with women. So actually it's not an either or. Like it's like, should this exist or do we just get nothing? And obviously something's better than nothing, right? So along those lines, one of the things I thought would be interesting was I just actually wanted to get your thoughts, because Gio wrote an article recently that I thought was a pretty good kickstart to this topic, where it was a very interesting perspective, because on the one hand, you said that for you actually felt like you didn't experience like a particularly negative entry point to esports, but you sort of tied that to the fact that you went to an all-girls school or something, which is a very interesting detail. And by the way, is like mad, like fucking fodder for people who are just obsessed with Geo. That's some detail in the origin story there.
So for the law.
And you tried to like tie this though. You made an interesting point that I'd never thought of. It. You said that actually this is what it sounds like. Initially, the fact that you didn't have any problems made you think like, oh, see, there's no problem. Like men and women should just always compete together. But actually, watching Game Changers made you come to the opposite conclusion that actually it's good to have a time period where you're sort of like sheltered in a way. Is that the right characterization?
Right, so I was kind of like, I used to be like, I want to say vehemently against things like women's leagues, but that makes it sound like I was actively going out there and saying it was a bad thing. Like I wasn't doing that. I just was not necessarily in favor, because I had always been irritated when people made like my womanhood the most interesting thing about me. Like it's one of my pet. I mean, Duncan, when you and I met in person, that was the conversation that we first had, right? At Monty's house, like was my irritation with people doing that. And it had irritated me because, you know, I did my degree in a very male-dominated subject, and I went to a very, very prestigious university to do it. And all I ever fucking saw was people be like, we need to do these women in STEM initiatives. And I was always like, I was always frustrated because I was like, there should not be a barrier to entry for the women who want to do it. But why do we have to artificially bring in women who would not otherwise choose to do it? Like, that's the way I always saw it. I was like, why are we trying to convince women who want to do a degree in English that they should be doing a degree in fucking physics? Like, that pissed me off. But over the last couple of years, and especially with Game Changers, and I think mostly with Game Changers because it's just been a lot more in my, like, sort of, like, immediate vision, I have really loosened up on that view, because I've started to recognize the difference between having like women's leagues as either like a oh, you're a woman, here you go, or as like an artificial stepping stone, and more about it being like eliminating factors that would otherwise be detrimental in a way that's like nothing to do with this.
Even though the term is obviously mad cursed now, essentially like a safe space for people to play. Like I say, we all know that term sort of cursed.
And actually, I think it was on the Riot's official, they put out a web page about an article about something recently, and the way they described it was as a training ground. I was like, that's actually a really good way of putting it, because what is essentially done is it means that like people who are part of whatever group, in this case, like not men, can go and just practice that shit in peace. And that's essentially what it is, because it's like, and if you speak to any of the women, especially the the high level competing women in these leagues, they don't want to be there. Like they want to leave. But it's kind of about like allowing them to just have that space to do that. And the way that I tied it into my education, and it's funny because this was something I realized as I was writing the article. Wasn't even something that I realized before then, was I had always like, so yeah, I did this, my secondary schooling, 7 years of it in all girls education. And so for me, when I was like choosing my subjects and they were these male dominated subjects, I was doing like maths, physics, whatever. There was no concept to me that these were men's subjects or not women's subjects, or that I was different for doing them. Like that just wasn't a concept where I went to school, because everyone was a woman, right? So when I left school, I never had like an issue with those things. There was never anything for me that was like, oh, I shouldn't be doing, or, you know, this is really male dominated. I'm like uncomfortable with this. I just didn't have that. But the reason I didn't have that was because I had 7 years of a space where I wasn't inundated with the fact that was a problem, right? And it's almost like I was writing this article, I was like, this is not this is not an indictment of it. This is like proof that that kind of system works, where like what Game Changers essentially does is it means that these people can go and like do their shit without it being made their problem that they're a woman. And then when they're ready to graduate and go and join like a mixed team or whatever, like then it just won't even be a concept to them that like, oh, I'm a woman, I shouldn't be here, because they've been given that space to develop where it's not made their fucking problem. And I was writing this and I was like, oh my God, like I like,
this is the esports equivalent.
Yeah, I just felt like I knew it was a good thing over the last couple of years that I was loosening up on it, because I could see it was important to other people. So I could tell that there was a time where I didn't get it, but it made sense to other people. So there was something I was missing. Like I could tell that. I knew that for some time. And I was really open to the fact that I wasn't just going to stand my ground and be like, I'm right, this is stupid, we should shut this down. Because like if it's something that other people like and it helps them and it's not giving an unnecessary or like an unfair advantage in like the streamlined system, then there's nothing wrong with it. And clearly I just need to figure out what it is that where my issue is or my misunderstanding. And as time has gone on, I've kind of like got to that point where I've realized that a lot of it is because I was in that system essentially when I was much younger. So as I've come into adolescence and then adulthood, those things just don't even compute in my head, because I was fortunate enough to have those things kind of like have that opportunity at a much, much younger age where I didn't have to deal with that shit that these people have still had to deal with it when they're older.
So you're fortunate that it only took you like 3 years to figure that out. It literally took me a decade to figure out, because I thought the same thing. Do not ever mention that I'm a woman. I don't want it to be talked about. The concept of women's teams, the concept of women's tournaments, like I was completely turned off by. I was co-ed only. I think there was another woman on my team, you know, very often. I didn't think about it. Like it meant nothing to me. Yeah. I just wanted to be the best in the world. I don't give a crap about my gender. I did join a team in 2012
when, right?
In 1. Yeah, exactly. And then it was when Go came out, and ESWC said we're switching to CS:GO. And I was picked up by the most famous women's team at the time, which they went through many names: GX3, SK Gaming, UB United. So I played with Miss Harvey, Ali, Potter, and JSO. And we won, and it was an amazing moment. And it was then that I started to realize, like, wow, okay, you know, I'm being celebrated because I just had like the most insane comeback ever. Like we were literally down 1-14 against Zaz, and we came back and we won in overtime. Then we were down 2-13 and came back the next map and won in overtime. And like people were talking about that, not because of our gender, just because it was a really, really sick performance with 3,000 people in the crowd and celebrating us. And so it took, and I started to change my mind over the years. And then, you know, as I worked for Dignitas and I was exposed to more esports besides Counter-Strike, I'm like, where are the women competitors? Like I don't see any in any other esport. And that's because Counter-Strike had a system. There was something in place. And like you said, I don't like calling a safe space. Like it's not a safe space. This is the top competitive league for this group of people. Like it is very intimidating. People are going to talk trash to you, your opponents, your teammates are going to yell at you, your coaches are going to yell at you. If you want to be in the top leagues, this is not a safe space. This is a top level competition.
Just that it removes that one. Yeah. Like one tumor. I'm
exactly.
Men are exactly. Tumor. I mean, like.
Yes. So.
No, but it's way. It is, as you say, it's a certain type of annoyance, isn't it? Like the point is, someone might still say you shit and might talk mad shit to you if they're another player. Sure. But the difference is they won't go like, "Hey, you're a woman." Like that just eliminated immediately. Yes.
Yeah. If I played terribly, if I'm garbage, like call it out. But like. Don't call it out because I'm a woman. Like
I think it's
that's
also
completely
like,
irrelevant.
And maybe I'm just speaking for me because I also understand that one of the things for me was that I started to recognize that just because I am comfortable in a male-dominated environment doesn't mean everyone is, and doesn't mean everyone should have to be either. Like, I was always very like, well, I'm okay with it, so what's the fucking problem? Like, that's not really how it works, is it?
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm very similar. Like, I always played sports with the neighborhood boys. I grew up with, you know, I've been comfortable with that.
Months younger than me. I was a boy. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But yeah, fuck, what was the point that you just made, Duncan?
That it eliminates a certain type of like annoyance if you're in that environment, etc.
So it's like so I can only speak for me, but I don't even think it's necessarily about like, okay, somebody like calls you a gender related insult. It's more about like whether you're actually held back because of that. So whether it's like people are evidently treating you differently, or I mean, if you just want to take the case of ranked, like there are people who might call you a bitch because you're a woman. Okay, cool. I can like move on with that. Or there are going to be people who like deliberately try to sabotage your game because you're a woman, and those are two
they try to like
things,
feed the game so you lose, right?
Right, and it's like it's the latter that I think is what people want to get away from. And then when you're talking about professional environments, like you always hear stories of like, oh, you know, there are teams that wouldn't feel comfortable having a woman on their team, and it's like, well, that's kind of like says it all, right? It's like that is their reason. That's their reason. And it's sort of like just eliminating that bullshit where it's like, okay, you don't have to deal with that. And also I will say, like, I know like the era of team houses is kind of over, but the idea of being a female player on a male team and having to share a house and not have your own space sounds fucking awful. So like, I know that that's like not the worst of the problems, but I've always thought that sounds horrific.
Yeah, I mean, traveling too is the same. You know, it's just, I don't know. There's just something about maybe being with another woman. Like, it's easier to, I don't know, bond with or understand the crap you got going on. I've always been a firm believer, like, not always, no. The last couple of years, I've been a believer, like, people say, like, why, you know, if you want to be the best, why are you playing with other women? Like, I don't care. Like, I genuinely don't care who people play with. Like, I think there's something rewarding about playing with 4 people you want to play with. And if they happen to be women, great. And like trying to win a championship like that seems cool to me. Like, I don't care who's on my team or what their gender is. I just want to try to be the best with the people that I enjoy playing with the most. So yeah, my mind has changed over the years about this.
Like I kind of said, like, I think so much of it for me has been like, I've always had like my view that is shaped by my experience and what I believe should be the ideal. Like, of course, the ideal is there shouldn't be women's leagues. And that's kind of what I was basing my view on, is I was like, I don't think that these should exist. It's like, okay, well, yeah, no, they shouldn't. Like, they shouldn't. But that's not the world we live in. And also just that idea that, as long as it's not like art, like, you know, for example, I don't necessarily believe in like positive discrimination. Like, for example, if you were to say, okay, we're going to take like 3 women and we're going to have a quota that 3 women have to play in the partnership teams, I wouldn't be okay with that, because that's like, no, this should be a level playing field. But as long as it's not a situation like that, and it is just like, okay, this is a tournament that wouldn't exist otherwise. It's just for these people. This prize money would not have otherwise gone to something else. Like, it is just its own thing. Like, at the end of the day, it doesn't really fucking matter what my experience is and whether I would be okay with it and whether I think it should or shouldn't exist. It's not hurting anyone and people like it. And I feel like that was just something that as I got older, right, I just kind of started to be a lot more comfortable with. Whereas like, it doesn't have to be just matching like my ideal and my experience, because this is something that matters to other people, and that's okay.
Yeah, because you could say the same about collegiate events or high school events or tier 2 or tier 3 events. It's like, oh, if they're not the best players, why should we watch? Why should they exist? They exist because it's simply getting more people involved. The collegiate events, the high school events get more people to consider competing. The women's events get more people to consider competing. Like I think in EMEA, like one of the Game Changers qualifiers had 128 teams. That's insane. Like in Counter-Strike, I Maybe you got to 128 total globally of women
in the whole world. Maybe, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, maybe the whole world. But any other esport, there's no way that exists.
Yes.
So they're getting more women to compete. They're getting more women to play ranked. They're doing things like playing Aim Lab and Kovacs, and they're studying VODs, and they're thinking about the game differently. At the end of
are you in the Valorant server?
Yes, yeah.
Because that community is like, it's not even just that it's thriving, it's like its own like metropolis. You know, it has like its, I don't want to say hierarchy, that's an awful word, but like it's like governance, right? Like it takes itself really seriously. And it's like, and it's a positive feedback loop in a sense, because yes, okay, you have this like 128 team bracket, but would that exist if Riot hadn't have like tried to cultivate that sort of ability for people to do that? Because I would imagine that in other esports, they probably would also have similar if it felt like the environment was welcoming. And as the environment gets welcoming like that and people start to enjoy being a part of it, that's gonna encourage more people to be a part of it, et cetera, and thus it grows. And that's kind of like why it is like that. And ultimately, I'm sure if you're Riot, like what it comes down to is great. We have like a growing demographic that isn't the standard like competitive video game demographic. We can market to these people. It's great. And that's what I will say. What I've always found really, really funny about you know, people who like to try and take like the kind of edgy, like right-wing stances on things online is like, ultimately, what these things come down to is capitalism. And in theory, you should be in favor of that. That's like what you're, you know, that's that, right? So just think of it like that. Like it is ultimately capitalism and it allows them to sell more things to more people. And if that's what helps you sleep at night, then think of it that way.
By the way, on the point you were making, oh, go on, hit me with it.
Well, I was gonna say there's a stat out there, and it was hidden in a very, very random, like non-esports related interview. From the head of partnerships at Riot, 40% of the players that play Valorant are women. 40. Yeah, this doesn't get highlighted enough, but it is out there in an interview. 40% is wild. My little 9-year-old niece and all her girlfriends at school are playing it.
Fair enough.
That's insane for an FPS title.
To the point you were saying earlier, though, like I actually think, because if you notice, that's actually one of my arguments I've made for years now. The joke is, I actually, in true Thorin style, I came to this epiphany through finding a way to donk on NA players in FPS games. You should just be in a class, you know, why change the habit of a lifetime, right, sapphiRe? Because what I realised is this, it's like you said, it's a good analogy, by the way, with the collegiate versus NBA example. Similar lines, like every single sport and competitive endeavour, by the way, guys, is actually divided, usually demographically. And it's not, by the way, the obvious one that is the political battleground of male versus female. Like, think about this. In games like Counter-Strike, one of the reasons why NA died out now is because essentially we did in Counter-Strike what everyone pretends they want if they're like only about being the best pro, which is you just have one set of leagues, and if you aren't in them, fuck you, there's nothing for you to play in. Like, you're just stuck over here, and essentially, if an NA team who hasn't gotten to the pro level yet wanted to play in like IEM Cologne, they'd probably have to like somehow move to Europe and then get on like like it'd be a nightmare. So what they did, like in every single game, by the way, so in StarCraft back in the day, they made WCS and they region locked. In League of Legends, like the joke is, if there was only one massive league in League of Legends, you'd never have heard of people like Doublelift because, spoiler, they weren't Korean. Like, it would just be no joke. Yeah, it would be like 40 Korean teams, like 25 Chinese teams, and like 2 European. You know what I mean? Like, there
it's
wouldn't
like
be.
If you had Worlds, but it didn't have like seeds from each.
There's another one.
region,
So I'll give you an example. We just had the World Cup, right? Remember, the World Cup does not just have one giant qualifier and say, whoever makes it, makes it. You have regional qualifiers because they want X amount of African countries, X amount of... So every single sport, by the way, does this. And what's one of the reasons? I'll tie it to what you just said, Gio. Capitalism. They don't want it to just be that, like, you know, like, for example, the joke is they don't want the European Champions League in soccer to be like 10 Premier League teams, because then how do you sell to someone who's in Portugal or in Italy? You know, you actually want everyone in theory to be involved because that brings all the fan base. So I even think, by the way, the college angle is an even better one, sapphiRe, because on that one, think about this. There's a tangible analytical way this would affect you. If you were someone who there was no collegiate system in sports, then what would happen is everyone, when they turned 18, would be like LeBron. They'd try and go to the NBA, right? Well, spoiler, if everyone tried at age 18 to go to the NBA, you actually wouldn't get many superstar players because there's no way you're going to get starting time. There's no way you're going to get your spot. You're probably going to play like garbage. Think about this, right? Imagine if there was ever ever a woman who actually was good enough to be like the best male player. Well, the point is, in this scenario, if she has to start out as like a sub and then just play like a spot, she's never going to even play her role. In the Valorant case, she would never play her agent. She would never play duelist or something. She would have to start off as the most rubbish role. And even if she got a career, it would be doing not her gig. So actually, there isn't like a logical transition point. Again, I think you nailed it as well, Gio. The key point here is it's not either or. We're not having a discussion like, right, at the end of this, we're all going to vote. And if we all vote, it's all female game. And if we vote no, they'll shut the whole thing down. It's like, it's all at the same time, you idiots. Like, by the way, you can totally say, I don't like that. Because there's another thing we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, I think the joke is every single game's split up, regionalised. And it's done intentionally, by the way, to help those areas. Like the whole reason you have NA cash cups in CSGO, that doesn't help a European player. It's just to help the NA player have a living and potentially get to the point where if he is good enough, he can now compete with the Europeans.
I find it kind of funny because it always seems, and this is anecdotal, and I'll inevitably piss someone off by saying this, but the people who seem to get the most upset about it always seem to be the people who, like, you know, there may be like diamond players who want to believe that they can like play in top tier Valorant, but they're never going to get there. And it's like, well, why do the women get their league? And
they think it should be for them.
Right. They want their handout because that's how they see it.
Right,
it's like they're like, oh, they get there, you know, and it's sort of like, honey, just work on yourself, go grind. You know, I never see people who are secure in themselves get wound up about it.
You know, the chat always just makes me laugh. Like, well, you know, why are they streaming? Like, just don't watch. Like, I don't know. It's so easy to me when I open Twitch. I just don't watch the things I don't want to watch. I just can't comprehend the I've tried to figure this out for 2 decades. Sure. If you don't like something, just don't watch it. Don't get it.
Oh, the other angle as well I wanted to hit, though, is because actually the reason I also did want to talk about this topic with you, sapphiRe, is because exactly you were basically the poster girl for the opposite mentality for female esports. Because as I said, you came up playing co-ed, like she was on co-ed teams when I said earlier, those like CPLs and stuff. And then that's even an interesting detail. When you came to play briefly in the best female team, the joke was no wonder they recruited you because you already played with all of it. You were actually in theory considered better than most of those players. Like it was actually an obvious in. So most people I know, in fact, this is actually to invoke his name. He's actually a great guy, by the way, if people don't know. It's totally misaligned the way it's done. When Semler and you were going back and forwards on Twitter, I know that's why he was disappointed, because he thought like, oh, you were supposed to be the one who proved you could make it, you know. But I actually think it's like what Gio said earlier, though. The difference is this. There is a type of woman who actually not only like is cool playing with it, they want to. By the way, a spoiler, when I was a boy, you just called them tomboys. Like there were people where like maybe they have loads of brothers, or maybe they're actually the sort of person like me, maybe they're just built for war, they just like to argue with people all the time and say fucking edgy things. If that type of person exists, like we're saying, it's both and they can play with men. Spoiler, they already were anyway. That's also why half of those discussions were so worthless online. People were talking, right, for real, as though this was a conceptual discussion, and we were like, right, they're just about to start the first female leagues. Like, what are you talking? You're about 15 years late. Like, we've been doing them the whole time. Like, we're not arguing whether the concept should exist. We're arguing how should it be done and how is it marketed, etc. So the question I have is that, like, is there anything else you could tell us about that? Because to me, one of the reasons I actually think of this is I just think to myself, similar to what you were saying earlier, like you had those nieces that play, for example. I know women who, they are not in any way a tomboy, and they definitely don't want people annoying them if they're playing. And even if they're good, they'd want to play somewhere where it's like, right, it's a cultivated area, I can start out here, I've got this. Like, those people, I think it would be inappropriate to tell them, like, right, just get grinding on the ladder, and when you get to be the 1,000th best player, try and join that team. Good luck. Like, what's that? You know, so give me your thoughts. Like, what was the evolution that made you realise, like, you want to have these leagues and you don't want to basically tell everyone, like, sort of put up with it and just battle the guys?
Well, yeah, it's funny because I was the opposite. Like, the cool group was playing with the guys. You know, I remember like at the CPLs, like there were, you know, like the Frag Dolls and PMS clan, and like I wanted nothing to do with those at the time because I thought, you know, that's going to be below me.
We would call the pick me girl mentality. Yeah.
I actually do know now a number of wonderful women that like were part of that and started that, and like now I look, I'm like, whoa, they get some really cool opportunities that I never had because I was grinding my way through CPL Open at the time. But yeah, I mean, I was always like playing with the guys is the cooler thing. But yeah, I mean, you look at Game Changers now, you look at like the level of production that they're doing, like sending video teams to players' houses, doing these like beautiful documentaries, like the stage that the event was at, like in this insane LED wall at the LEC studio, like all the quality is like right up there with some of their bigger events, and I mean, that's exciting as a player. That's exciting to be celebrated. It's exciting to get your stories told about you, the content. So I think Riot's done a nice job with it. ESL has done a nice job as well, like building bigger stages, bringing in better talent for ESL Impact. Like all of the things have leveled up. So like my mindset has changed over the years. Going back to the similar point, like I think one of the things that one of my arguments was like it doesn't. It's fine. Like we said, like I don't see a problem with this existing. The one thing I did agree with him though is, he said like when certain leagues were announced, it's to fight the toxic men,
yes.
which that
was his main point. If people don't know,
yeah,
just
which
the way
I
it was
completely agree with him. Like the majority of men that I've interacted with in Counter-Strike and Valorant have been incredible. They've taken care of me. They've given so many opportunities. They've celebrated me. One of my favorite stories is that ESWC and we're playing for a chance to get into the grand finals, and behind us is Shroud and Nothing and Skadoodle, like legitimately cheering their minds out for us. And yeah, so I'm completely with him there in that like there's a lot of good people too, a lot of good men that have like supported the women, or just like shutting down toxicity, all that. So I don't know. I understand where he was coming from there.
I will like just jump in on that and be like, I am definitely not a proponent of any kind of like argument that is tries to sort of make men the problem, as if because I think the problem with stuff like that is while an all-male environment may not be super welcoming to a woman, it might not necessarily because the men in that environment are bad. It might just be because that's an intimidating environment for various reasons, right? For various social reasons. But I don't like anything where it's phrased or framed to make individuals in that group feel like they are being made to be a bad or being made out to be a bad person for something that they actually haven't done.
Yeah, and you can say the same about, people try to group all women the same too,
exactly,
and how women approach the game,
but I think I was just gonna say, I think that it is something I see every now and then where like, yeah, people kind of phrase things in this like, fighting the toxic men, as you put it, kind of thing. And it's sort of like, I worry that sometimes when things are phrased that way, it's just, that's not going to make anybody want to bat for your team, because sure. Like you're kind of like, if you're telling someone like you're bad because you're part of X group, how would you react to that? Like you of course you're going to want to defend yourself, and making people feel defensive about something that isn't actually a threat, i.e. in this case, opening women's leagues is not a threat to men, but like putting it in a way that's going to make those people feel defensive is only ever going to cause a rift. That's never going to like, yes. And it doesn't need to. It's so unnecessary. So like, I just wanted to jump in and be like, I would agree with that.
By the way, that's also just totally human nature. Like, I'll give you an example of where I've seen that same behavior myself, and I'd almost be like, what the fuck? Like, I'll give you an example. When Lurpis, Tommy, if people will know from MIBR now, and he used to obviously be a pro player and an analyst, when he used to live briefly in the UK, because he used to work for like JP Morgan or something in London, right? When he used to live there, because if you know him, he's one of those guys, not just about counter, he complains about everything. He's like me, that's why we're friends, right? And when he would just complain about everything in London, like, traffic, like problems with the fucking rent cost, when he would complain, because he was sort of complaining like UK sucks, even though he's my friend, I agree the UK sucks, and I wouldn't want to live and have those problems, because he would be like, UK UK sucks. The amount of times I've had to stop myself from just typing like, then leave, then get the fuck out. Like, because it's part of you makes it start, because the problem is, this is how symbols work. When you say the UK sucks, I start thinking of like my family. It's where I grew up. There are good things. Like, wait a minute, I'm the UK. You know what I mean? Like, even though that's not the association. So I actually think, by the way, that's actually a massive area why these whole conversations get derailed. Because, for example, if Semler argues like, I don't like the way this is messaged, people are like, wait a minute, you just don't want any female Esports, which isn't what he was saying at all. But they just take that side because there are people who think that, and they think, right, you're a man, you're speaking against it, you must all be in the same group, so I'm just going to do my take to that whole group. Except what you don't know in that case is Semler wasn't that group. And in fact, the real joke about that whole topic, without making it a whole sidetrack about Semler, if people don't know, is I tried to make a tweet about this, but people misinterpreted it. It's not like, again, Semler just discovered yesterday there are women trying to play sport. He knows sapphiRe. He's known all these people for like 15 years. Like, he's been at all the events. He's been at those events, had women's events. You think he doesn't know people like Zaz? Of course he does. We all do. We've all been at the events where they were there as well. By the way, I actually have a segue I want to spin this into, because I've got an angle I haven't seen anyone try to do yet. And I think for real, this is a really good business idea for esports. You know how, sapphiRe, when we would do those events, particularly I know ESL New York used to do this, there used to be the events where one of the things they love to do is, because on Sunday when you have the finals day, aside from like an all-star match or something, you can't do any more CS because it's just the final, right? And you want like all the time to prepare into it. You don't want like another game to ruin the schedule, basically. So anything you do is just by definition filler. So famously at this event, what they used to do is they would make like a business deal with some record label, and they would have a musical act. But the problem is, it's not a musical act you've ever heard of, hence why they're playing like a video game tournament. And it's sort of like I'll just say it, spoiler, ESL would get money from the company, and then they would have like a performance. It would usually be like an hour or 45 minutes before the final, right? And yes, it's true, obviously all the fans were just like, this sucks, like shut it down, like, but remember, if that wasn't on, it would just be a blank screen. There'd be nothing there for that hour before the game. The joke is, I think they should take cues from the UFC, where in the UFC, remember, women do not fight against men, but they do fight on the same card. What I would do is this: I would actually have like the finals of some women's tournament. Like, I would play to the semis, like maybe at another venue, and I would just put the final of the women's tournament like 2 hours before the men's final. That way you're going to get like, or after the men's, one of the two. You can either like piggyback on the same stream and see who stays, or you could do it as the warm-up act, and that way people actually, remember, there's nothing else you can watch at that time. It's like the same as the UFC. Are you going to go away for 20 minutes till the men's fight? Or are you just going to watch the female title fight? And the reason I give that example is so many people who are UFC fans now actually like women's MMA just from the way those cards are done. They wouldn't have tuned in if it was like the Victus, all female. They'd have never watched it, because they've just naturally like taken it in passively. The joke is they're fans of the champions of the female divisions of the UFC. I think that could work in esports.
I think you're in my Google Drive looking at my business plan right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Completely. Like, it's an absolute no-brainer to me. You're still watching a competitive match. You're going to build new fan bases. You're going to have the same talent, which is exciting.
Yes, that's a big deal. By the way, I actually thought a big deal for ESL Impact was having people like Anders. That's like the voice of Counter-Strike, if people don't know.
It means the world to the amount of times I've seen a tweet from the players like, holy crap, Anders just cast my game. Right. That means everything to them. They're going to be watching that back, and that motivates them even more because they want that to happen even more. Yeah, exactly. So it makes absolutely insane amount of sense. I want to see it more. I do, I think what Game Changers did, like you said, it was like an open spot in the calendar. There was nothing else to watch. They put it on the main channel, which is also good. By the way, putting things on the main channel, I think, is a very good thing for these two too. When they're offline, why not? Why not just add extra content instead of putting it on a channel that has very few followers and you're trying to build something up? It's very few times these things are going to overlap from the main publisher or something. So putting them on the main channel, which again, Riot does a good job of, it's going to ping all the people that are following it. If you don't want to watch, don't freaking watch. But yeah, absolutely 100% agree. I want to see that across ESL, Valorant, everything next year.
What else should we talk about? Is there any other topic?
I don't know.
I don't know. What's going on in Valorant? I don't know, because
I've got a question then. What about this then? So when it comes to next year, this is the question I have though, is it known yet how they will like run the Game Changers like parallel to how they will run VCT stuff? Like is there a logic? Does anyone know like how the circuits, will they overlap? Will they be like separate again? Is there any understanding of that sense?
Anything about Game
I don't think they've, they have for, I think they did for EMEA.
Because I know they announced like the EMEA, they announced a bunch of stuff about EMEA, right?
Which I think
Am I making that up?
No, I think they did, and I think it's
I know that LEC did a bunch of announcements, so I'm trying to think if I'm confusing it.
No, I think EMEA did. I think it's a more built-out schedule, which is good, because that would have been one of my complaints as, someone who works for Dignitas, and we had a team, and great for the players, but the teams are expensive in Game Changers now. It's very expensive for only having three events per year in a championship. Obviously, we want the teams playing in other events, co-ed events, etc. But I'd love to see more of like a league format that leads into the individual tournaments, that then leads into the championship. So I hope I just see more, but we haven't seen anything. And I guess I'd also add like I'd like there to be some like global alignment too.
Okay.
The way people qualified for from different regions for the championship was all very different. Some regions only had like a single tournament. Some had 3-4 tournaments.
Oh, right, I see.
I think there needs to be more consistency there, and hopefully like the slots increase too for the championship. It was 8 this time, which is it's fine. It's a first test, but like we saw, like in Valorant, Asian teams are pretty decent. So would like to see more from them. They're very charismatic. Their fan bases like exploded from this event. So I just want to see more next year. But yeah, not announced yet.
There was definitely like, I think proof of like demand as well, because a lot of people were very upset when they announced that it was going to be in the LEC studio, because the tickets sold out instantly, and they're like, there's only a couple hundred people in the studio. But it's like, well, I'd imagine part of the reason it was done in the LEC studio is because it doesn't cost them any money to rent out the LEC studio, because it's theirs. So this is like this year's Game Changers Championship is like a proof of concept, right? So they weren't gonna like go balls to the wall and like throw all their money at it. But knowing where that demand was now, I would imagine that next year they probably have like tons of proof to go and invest a lot more in it, because they know they'll get that return on investment. So I'm hoping for the same thing. I'm hoping it's going to be a lot more standardized in terms of the leagues, but then like also a much more of a big deal at the end of the season whenever they do the Game Changers champs next year as well. But yeah, the thing that I was like really intrigued about, and I don't know if this will ever get announced, or like if we're still waiting for information, or if it's just been late enough now that we just assume it's not the case. But I assumed that the teams who got into the partnership program would be required to field Game
I'd heard a rumor, by the way, I've said this in the past on the show, I heard a rumor that was going to be like a stipulation, like potentially you had to have, because if people don't know, in League of Legends, there was a time, it's not anymore, but I believe there was a time where LCS actually demanded you had to have like an academy team in League of Legends, for example.
You still do.
Yeah. Still do. So it wouldn't even be, by the way, some like totally unreasonable thing to demand. Essentially what you demanded is build out the infrastructure.
Like, part of the application process or whatever, at least as far as I'm aware, is like, in general, you had to like prove your dedication to the scene.
Yes.
Like, do you think Riot are not going to ask them to have Game Changers rosters if it's something that they're really investing in? Like, that seems ridiculous. Like, that seems like, because of course it was someone on Reddit, but someone on Reddit like replied to a comment of mine being like, I don't think Riot would ask teams to have like Game Changers rosters. And I'm thinking, have you ever seen a franchise league in esports before? Like, and so if that is the case,
I like your Reddit voice at least. Like normally people just do a silly one. Yours is like sassy. I like it.
Because I like to be condescending to people on Reddit. If that is the case, like when are we going to see all these roster announcements?
True.
Like because because the actual league starts in, I was going to say March. Is it that late, or is it a little bit earlier? I don't know, the EMEA thing.
See, I don't know what's public, so
I think it's
there you go, exactly. Be careful. Just be careful.
Yeah, I'm gonna be careful.
That's fine. Yeah, yes, I've heard different things about the differences between NA and EMEA as well, but I know that NA haven't announced anything.
By the way, another thing I thought was another angle as well we could talk about is like, right, put it this way, there was like a really funny stand-up bit I saw that Bill Burr had, but he actually made a very valid point in it, which he said one of the reasons he thinks why like women's sports aren't as popular is because women don't watch them very much, which is a very valid point to make, by the way. Like, put it this way, there was a lot of people with blue check marks, love donking on me. I've been to their Twitter feeds, can't find a single tweet about Valorant. You won't see anything about Game Changers. You won't see anything about ESL Impact League. The same people tell you, just let it exist. They don't watch it themselves. The joke is, I'm going to watch more than they are, and I'm not even a huge fan of that aspect. I mean, I'm just the latest in every game anyway. So the angle I thought was this. His joke was, women aren't like huge fans of female sports, but if you look at what women do watch on TV, it's like the Kardashians, it's like drama stuff, right? So along these lines, I think the most obvious area that has not been exploited in female esports, especially Valorant and CSGO, is the personalities of all the people. No, for real. Like, who the fuck wouldn't have like who wouldn't have like a reality series following like Gozen or something? Like, the point is, not only are they being funny to each other, like, I'm sure the trash talk's hilarious. And if you do it right, the key thing is you have to do it right, obviously. I could see people getting super into those storylines. Remember, at that point, when people, this is what's great about drama and trash talking, it no longer matters if that is the best player. It matters that these two people have a problem with each other. Like this one won last time. They're battling now. Who's going to win? Who's going to say? That's an in. That's an in for anyone to watch, even if you don't know the game that much.
I mean, G2 are very good at doing their own stuff like that. I think they really market their players very well.
Sure.
But yeah, obviously I understand. Because I think like the content surrounding Game Changers Champs was really good. But that is an interesting point. Yeah, I would imagine that like women's sports that get really popular probably have a similar demographic of audience to what the men's sports are like. Because I mean, like a really good example, right, is the NWSL, the women's like soccer league in the US, is massive. It's huge. People love it, but people love it because they love football.
Yeah.
Oh, right, I actually, mean, right.
yeah. I actually went to the Angel City game, the LA game, and that was the first. Oh God, not going to say.
I've heard the actual turnout is pretty good for those games, right?
There's it's insane. Yeah, it's almost sold out every single game, and people just like watching football. And so yeah, I think there's a lot they can learn there. I think from Valorant, I think we got to do a better job as the storylines. Like, it's not just on Riot too. Like, it's got to be on the teams too. I think. Some teams' natural reaction will be like, oh, of course our men's team is going to get more views, so like we're going to put our effort into there. But like, yeah, we got to start telling the stories of the players, because I think again the most interesting part, like you said, there is trash talk. There's a lot of competitiveness, like the way they show up.
Oh my God, on the stage. Going insane.
Oh yeah. It was the amount of trash talk, the things that didn't even make it on the mics is just insane. But they think about the same way. Like they're top level competitors. They don't like the other team. They don't like how they looked at them or how they're playing, and they're gonna let it known. And I like showing that stuff off, because that's what you follow in the main league too. You get excited about those players. There's the equivalent of Boaster in the women's league that are doing like really weird, silly out there dances and like expressing themselves. Like exactly. Right, showing that off is great, because they're all not, they're not all just showing up and doing like little hearts or something.
Right.
Like,
the cutesy
they're flexing, they're brushing off their shoulders. They're like, C9, when they walked in at Game Changers, they didn't smile ever. And that was their bit. Like, that's they're being badasses. They're being intimidated. Like, noticing all those little bits starts to build the fandom for this.
Yes. Here's an angle as well I'll give you. If you're one of my viewers, I said, who's just like, say you're just like a 17-year-old boy, and you're like, why do I care about any of this? I'll give you a reason why you would care. Not right now, but one day. Is right now you are just a 17-year-old boy. You're just playing Counter-Strike. Maybe that's a game you're the best out of Valorant, right? Think about this. Here's one reason why, if I lived in LA, I might go to the soccer game that she just talked about there. I don't have to like the women's team. What if I have a daughter? What if I have a wife, a girlfriend? What if one of them fucking plays? Like, wouldn't you go and support them if your granddaughter was playing in the professional? Of course you would. Like, so that's another reason why actually it's necessitated that there's a space in the scene that you can have people play like that, of course.
It always makes me laugh when grown men are like just absolutely crapping on me in a game. Like, what? You have a daughter? Like, come on, man. someday you're gonna change how you think about this.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
Yeah, of course. You know,
It's actually, you know something? It's even something I would say is another area why if you just label it like men are just toxic guys, that you'll actually miss the whole conversation. Because I would actually say in the industry, in general, I would say men are like massively biased in favour of women in the industry. It's mainly fans that are doing all these shitty comments or just some random guy in a pub server. Actually, I'd say the men, like you said earlier, sapphiRe, are super supportive because that's the key. Here's the difference. I was way edgier when I was just a guy who played the game and went to like 5 events. When like I'm friends with people at the events and I'm people that I've come up with like Porter and stuff, that changes it. That does actually that changes your perspective a little bit. By the way, you notice that's what I always go back to. This is why I like shaming people and just tell them just do it this way because it's right. That'll never work. The best possible way you can actually change people's minds or enlighten them, in my opinion, is you just share personal experience. Like here's the difference. If someone likes Gio's casting it and then they hear her real life experience of what school was like and then what it was like early on, they're not going to go like, oh, but what about this? It's like they're just listening to you, they're hearing what actually really happened to you and your real experience in life. And surely on a human level, you can sort of go, oh, that is a little bit like, it's different to my experience, but I can see how that could fake that way. It's why actually sometimes, believe it or not, in a fucked up way, I actually don't get that mad at some of the people who go ham at me because actually what I do is this, I just think to myself, I've no doubt that person, they don't know me in most cases. They are just actually someone who probably had a really bad experience either in the game, in the industry, or just with men in general. And what they're doing is they're just making me the poster boy for like evil men and they're just having a lash out. And the problem is, obviously, if I read it, it'd hurt me because it's my name. It's like, that's what's me. But it's not really about me in that case. It's some other thing they're dealing with. So I actually think if we all knew our own baggage and our own experiences, I don't think there'd be half these problems. I think I'd cut through all the crap.
No, yeah, you're I mean, it's true. You know, you're exactly right. Like, especially like if you look at like, there's not any pros out there right now, whether they're just being like, you know, PR smart or not, or they genuinely believe it. Like they're all like around Game Changers. There were so many pros like.
Oh, they're picking it up.
I mean, but
enjoying their time. Yeah.
This kind of goes back to what I said earlier. Is I think that the reason why most, if not all, male pro players are at worst neutral about like women's esports and at best like actively supporting it is because they're not insecure about their own abilities. Like they don't see it as a threat. Whereas I think that 17-year-old boy that you kind of, you know, this hypothetical 17-year-old boy who gets kind of like antsy about it is probably because like that kid doesn't want to feel like he's being shown up by a woman, right? And so like I think that's something that a lot of people grow out of. Like I can understand why a 17-year-old boy might feel that way. But yeah, I think that in general, like a lot of the pro players, like it's not a threat to them. Like I think most of this stuff comes from insecurity. Like it's people who aren't they're not comfortable with the idea that like they're good enough or that, you know, they're like whatever. And so like it gets projected and it's like, okay, like I understand why people do that. It's like a natural thing. But I think that if you like go like see all these interactions with that in mind, like that becomes a pattern.
Oh, I would agree. Put it this way. I would say a classic thing that people do. I actually wrote a column once that addressed exactly this topic, is the idea that it's when they say the line, they go, you only got that job because you're a woman. Well, I made a point in this article, like, that's not actually the way anyone gets their job. Even if it was a job for women, by definition, she is the best woman though. Like you have to think, Lord, she did have competition. And I made the point in this article that spoiler, that's how every job works. Like for example, I give, again, just to bang on NA people, I gave the example in the article that like Stewie 2K is a way more famous player with bigger sponsor opportunities than like I could pick like some random player from like Ukraine who's not as famous but might be like twice as good at CS:GO. Like in that scenario, you don't go to Stewie 2K. Of course, you already got that job because you're from North America. It's like, no, he's from North America and he's like a guy who won a major, has a normal, you know, like it isn't just that, is it? Like the joke is if that's the one part that's getting to you, like spoiler, you weren't going to make it anyway, mate. Even if you were a woman in this case, would you be better than that woman? We don't know that. These are the absolute best.
I did a TikTok once about how I had gotten a really big opportunity because I had sent a cold email to somebody who was a potential stakeholder in that decision. And it was never proven or disproven to me whether or not that was why I got the opportunity, but I have a strong feeling that it was. And it was just like me kind of like selling myself to this person, right? And I got a lot. Yes.
I'm just wondering how you got this gig. It's getting a bit dodgy at the moment. Go on.
Selling my career.
There you go.
person.
Right. Okay.
I got a lot of comments from people being like, "Oh, well, that's because you're a woman." It's like, well, So what? It was like this person was just waiting for the first woman to email them, and they were going to be like, right, it's yours. There's the job. You have
I don't know if you know, guys. I feel like woman in the esports industry, pretty saturated market, actually. It's not really like there's only two, is there? There's a lot of competition.
It's so funny. But I think like that's actually an interesting thing in the sense of like talent work as well, is I feel like even in the time that I've been in esports professionally, which is not a long time, like the sort of cultural attitude to women in talent is different. And I don't mean because it was
massively
bad when I started. I don't even think that people were like against it when, you know, obviously they're like, again, random fans who were, but when I started, there was still tokenism. And that was the thing that fucked me off the most when I came into the industry. And that's, again, like, that's how you and I first became friends, Duncan, because I was ranting about it to you. I was so pissed off that in my first year of working professionally, a lot of people wanted to like goad me down certain paths because they were easier to hire women for. And I was frustrated that I couldn't be taken seriously as a color caster as easily as my male counterparts could.
Yes.
That's what fucked me off. And it's funny because I was being offered work more than them, but it was work I didn't want because they weren't listening to what I wanted to do. And that was the thing that pissed me off. Whereas now, I look at, I mean, female friends I have who have like maybe in the last year just started like doing talent work, or even just, I mean, Valorant as an esport is a really good example. It's like, you know, you have so many like female talent, but it's not even like no one fucking sits there being like, wow, this Valorant champions desk has Yinsu and 2 female analysts on it. That's like, no one's saying that because it doesn't even cross people's minds because it's a lot more like ingrained. It's just, yeah, this is a good host with 2 good analysts. And that's kind of it. And I'm like, wow, that's actually so interesting that in a short space of time, like just a couple of years, that has gone from being a talking point and tokenism still being prevalent to just not even being a thing. When Pansy won Play-by-Play Caster of the Year, like just last week, people aren't like, oh my God, it's so cool that a woman won. People are like, yeah, it's fucking Pansy. Like, of course she's winning Play-by-Play Caster of the Year. And to be honest, she probably deserved it a long time ago.
She did, yeah.
But it's just like, it's just not, when in the talent space, it's not even a talking point anymore. So I feel like for players, it can't be that far behind.
No, it's the same evolution. Because here's the thing, what you're talking about, by the way, this is another one of the ironies of the way things have been framed the last year. That's one of the areas I was on the fucking cutting edge of from day one. Like, if people don't know, I know now, obviously, we're never going to be fucking pals anymore. But like, for Toxicity, one of the reasons I always pushed her as talent is because she was trying to do the de facto most knowledgeable role on the... She wanted to be the main, like, colour commentator or desk analyst. And the joke was at the time, she was just trying to be, not just like be a female Monte Cristo, compete with Monte Cristo, like directly. And she was good, by the way. She was putting in mad hours, watching all the games. Similarly, in CSGO, if people don't know, right, Potter, who used to be a pro and used to be a player back in the days of sapphiRe, she used to get hired, but like for DreamHack Open, that was all they'd hire her for. So I was putting her on Flashpoint as like my main analyst, because I also thought like she's got her own profile. The joke is you can even reference on her rookie, she's a world champion, you know, all that jazz, like loads of experience. Like, that's one thing I do think the industry was slow to catch on to, but now it does look like, like you say, it's only taken a couple of years and that somewhat that barrier is gone. Because before, I can tell you, the joke is behind the scenes, it was actually some of the people who would pretend to be super woke now who were saying exactly these things. Like, they would say to Toxicity something like, oh, you know, come on, love, smile a bit more, and, you know, maybe like, you know, can you do your hair a bit differently for the show? Like, even though she wasn't playing like the host. Similarly, like, I've heard stories where they say to the other women, just be the host or be an interviewer, you can do that, you know.
Yeah, that was what
the point is, they never wanted you to be the man. In fact, people have even said to people like Toxicity, I'll just say people like, they've told them stuff like, people don't really like it when like a woman speaks authoritatively about that, right? Here's the thing about that. Even if that was true, by the way, the answer there is, but she is an authority though. Like, she's not trying to do it. She actually does know what she's talking about though. So actually, I think you can break through all those barriers. It just takes time, like you say.
I think like the funny thing is, and I'll like mention this here, I've obviously had people like at times, especially when you have all your fucking Twitter shit, like, and people are like, how come you're friends with Thorin? And I'm like, well, actually, you were the first person who I met in esports who I truly felt like respected me because I was good at my job and not because you didn't see it through the lens of like, oh, this is like a woman, you know. And that is why we got on when we
Sure.
first met, and that is why, like, you know, I don't agree with everything you say, and this isn't really about like.
I don't agree with everything I say. Sometimes I just say stuff, believe it or not.
Right.
I'm human.
But it's like, that was the thing that has always stood out to me, is that at a time where I felt like I was fighting to be respected just because I was good at my job, you were one of, if not the first person who I truly felt like I had that from. And that is, I've never forgotten that.
It's because if people don't know, I've even said this in the past, it's because when I used to go on Gio's Instagram, I'm only human, when I would be on there, unlike everyone else, it wasn't just Gio's Instagram I was impressed by. Whatever. I made it funny, whatever. The point is, when I was on there, it was actually that in your stories, you would always have loads of these stories where it'd be like, right, I was just watching this game, and here's all my notes, and I'd be like, for that one game, it's like, if you don't know, it was like, you know, like the girls in school who do way too much like homework. She was doing that like for every VOD, like it would have like fucking, and they would be like color coordinated, and then when I would read these stories, I'd be like, she didn't even use that for anything. That was just to remember the game. Like, so I was actually impressed, because if people don't know, there are even some male analysts, maybe you can guess some of them, sapphiRe, in CSGO who might have the rep that they do that, and they definitely don't. Some of them are barely even watching the game in the bloody green room. So I was actually mad impressed, like, because that shows me you're actually putting in crazy hours, trying to be super knowledgeable, trying to take in all the info. And I can tell you a lot of your peers aren't doing that, no matter what the fucking sex is, mate.
Yeah, it's actually funny you bring that up, Gio, because I think you Duncan, you interviewed, like, it was an LEC interview a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, Law,
maybe?
yes.
Yeah, and I think
I saw the backlash.
I remember,
for that.
so like there was a lot of backlash. I feel really bad for her, because, you know, and I thought the same thing when you reached out to me. I'm like, oh, you know, I obviously, like, you know, I'm trying to be the role model for women now and everything. And, you know, like,
there'll be some tweets come, don't worry.
I've been like preparing my like Twitter response before it even happens. And it's just like, you know, kind of what Gio says, like, you know, that the way I've built up my brand in this industry is like truly through like hard work, because I just genuinely want to be there. And like, while I don't necessarily agree with everything you say either, like the only way, like, you know, is to have a like, I want to have a conversation about the way I think about things. And we talked about that before, like how, you know, I like to talk about my story, so that, like, you know, the reason that maybe people consider me one of the top observers in the world is because of all of this thought that I've put it into. I don't do this as a full-time job either. So like I've put aside like every like friendship that I've had. I don't have any free time. Like I put my entire life into this. And you know, that's how I try to build the respect for what I do, because I put in more thought than other people that might be in my position too. So yeah, I've already prepared for the Twitter war if it happens.
Money doesn't grow on trees, and believe it or not, just watching a video for free with the odd ad doesn't really pay the bills. So thanks to the following people for kindly supporting my work and this particular content. And those people are, of course, Ahmed Hadjou, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Jensen Goh, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Thooorin, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion, my main man. You know what? There are plenty of perks to be found on my Patreon. Like, you can find out who upcoming guests are for my reflections, interviews, and talk shows. You can ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Might get roasted if it's a bit spicy in how you phrase it. You can figure out which pieces of content I might want to do next. I often ask people which they think between certain ideas, offer suggestions. You can even take part in one of those long discussions with me about all kinds of esports, whatever's on your mind. So if any of those sound like something that takes your fancy, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Illuminati today via the Patreon link in the description below.